There is hope for recovery. People don't have to stay locked down into such internal turmoil and pain with behaviours that cause, such difficulty for everybody, when naturally there are keys that God has released to us to see the brokenhearted healed.
Welcome everybody, this is Simon Gilbo with Inspired. So much terrible, depressing news out there, and we just want to churn out week by week wonderful stories of different people in different walks of faith with their experience of God and their stories of overcoming through really difficult times. So this week I'm very excited. I've got with us Betsy de Thierry. Hi Betsy.
Hello.
And it's wonderful to have Betsy. She was actually born in Burundi, so she got to Burundi before I did even. First time we came across each other was you were running, Betsy, the biggest CU in the country. I was a student at Loughborough. You were running this humongous CU, the University of Gloucester. And then now we're both in Bath together. I just want to tell a funny story. You don't know this about your parents. So we hosted Betsy's parents, and they hadn't been back to Burundi for years. They'd had some quite... Ian and Jackie, by the way, I hope you don't mind me telling this story. Doesn't reflect badly on you. But Lizzie, my wife, picked them up from the airport, and I think they'd had some traumatic experiences in Burundi because there had been a genocide and all sorts. And I think particularly Jackie, I think was quite nervous. Totally fair. Anyway, I'd always taught Lizzie, and this could sound completely wrong to you people that haven't experienced Africa, but basically there are so many police checkpoints, and they always stand in the road, put their hands up and stop you and delay you for about 10, 15 minutes. They're asking for a bribe. It's really tedious. So I always said to Lizzie, when you see a policeman as you're driving, just look to the person to your left and just blast past the checkpoint and completely ignore the person. So Lizzie picks them up to the airport, your lovely parents, and she comes to this police roadblock. And this guy confidently steps into the road, puts his hand out, and basically Lizzie behaves like she doesn't give a flying monkey in submitting to authority, blasts past him, pretending to talk to, or she probably was talking to Ian and Jackie. And it just happens that the only time ever that this policeman, in our experience, had a motorbike, and he jumped on the motorbike and came blasting after them, flagged them down. I think your parents completely freaking out, saying, what is this nuts, disrespectful missionary woman? We thought she was a godly woman. She's giving 2 fingers to authority. My wife, Lizzie, was absolutely mortified. She will hate this story even being on air, but that's the only time it ever happened. So again, Ian Jackie, it's the only time that tactic didn't pay off. But Lizzie said, I am never using that again. I carried on for all 20 years of us being out there and never had any issues. Anyway, Betsy, enough of me. Listen, you are so welcome on this. And I just think that we're going to really struggle to pack in, I know, a tenth of the juicy stories that you've got to share, because there's so much going on. We joked before the show, guys, that Betsy has got no less than 6 email addresses. Do you know anyone? I don't know anyone else who's got more than 3. So you got 6, and then a shopping one, so a 7th one. So that's absolutely absurd, but reflection on how many different jobs and how many hats you carry. So, all right, enough of me. Over to you, Betsy. So, born in Burundi, take us from there.
Well, I still have a Burundian flag in my shed because I feel very, very Burundian. But I grew up as a daughter of a vicar and did all sorts of things. I think my confusion of life probably lay in the fact that I thought that everybody grew up wanting to start churches, and I chose my university actually on the basis that I figured I wouldn't have to do any academic work.
Right.
Because I got pretty good A-levels. So I decided to go there so that I could start a church. I did some research back when Google wasn't a thing. And I went purely to start a church, which I did do quite soon in, which was quite a shock. We had about 400 people give their lives to Jesus in 2 years. And
wow.
I then realized that was quite a thing, and there were quite a lot of traumatized people, quite a lot of people that were wanting to take their own life, and suddenly I started up therapeutic groups for them, and it was just all chaotic. But I thought that was normal. It was only probably in my 30s I realized that wasn't very normal, which I entirely blame my granny for. My granny was born in Kenya, and she was an incredible pioneer woman, and I guess I grew up thinking she was the best thing ever. So she was definitely a big influence in my life. So that's kind of how I started doing church stuff. And I did a theology degree at the time, which was in the form of a B.Ed. So it was a Bachelor of Education with theology as my main subject. So I came out as a teacher, but also a psychotherapist. I did a counselling training at the time during that.
Mm-hmm.
And I started this it began as a prayer meeting. It went into, was it a CU? Was it a church? But that's also how I met my husband, because Mike Pilavachi preached quite often. And one of my worship leaders at the time had lived with her family, had hosted Mike. And then hosted my husband, who was the youth pastor at St Andrew's Chorleywood. And so there were all these mutual connections, and that's how we ended up meeting each other very, very soon after graduation.
Okay, I didn't realise Andrew was there. You've jumped straight into students and beyond.
Yeah.
Just take us back to when you came to know Jesus.
Well, I was 4. I was in the back of a car. We were going over a bridge, and my lovely brother, who lives in Canada, he, in his very gentle, very thoughtful, reflective way, said randomly in the back of the car, he was 18 months older, so he was 5, and he just said, I want to become a Christian.
Wow.
And in my head, and I find this fascinating for child development and what we know about children, in my head I thought, oh, I do too, but there's no way I'm going to do that on my own. So if I do it now at the same time as my brother, I won't have so much kind of awkward attention. So I said, me too, me too. And then my dad led us in a prayer while we were driving over a bridge.
Wow.
And I prayed it very earnestly and very, very, very seriously. And I was 4 years old. So we must never, ever devalue when a child gives their life to Jesus. It can be the most profound and meaningful thing, even when they're tiny.
Yeah. And so did you have a steady sort of discipleship growth from there, or did you have a sort of season of going nuts and AWOL in your teens, or what did it look like?
No, I've always been the one that actually, well, I had a music scholarship to my school, so I had the enormous joy of having an instrument room that was essentially mine to use anytime I wanted. Sadly, I rarely played an instrument in it. I used to write notes to my friends saying, I'm wondering if you are battling with fear. Would you like me to pray for you? And then they'd send a note back going, yes. And I'd say, meet me in my instrument room and I'll pray for you. So I used to miss most of my lessons.
Wow.
Because I prayed for people and practiced. I read lots of books about Jesus and then would practice discipleship really in my instrument rooms.
Is this like as an 8-year-old or 9-year-old, 10-year-old? Is that sort of age?
No, when I was 9, I was just very awkward. That was when I used to have stickers on my bag that said, Jesus loves you. And I'd tell people they were going to go to hell. So that was awful. That was just very bad evangelism all around. No, this was 11 to 18 was the school, my secondary school with an instrument room that became my discipleship zone.
And were you considered odd then? I mean, it was unusual, but I mean, you managed to sort of do it winsomely.
Do you know what? I'm still friends with most of my school friends because we're all about to turn 50. So we've all sort of joined a WhatsApp group, and I've been asking them, how did you perceive me?
Yeah.
And they say, oh, you do exactly the same now as you did then. You work with children, because I used to run the prep school, the 7 to 11s Christian Union, that was very organised. But in fairness, I did used to give them lollipops. So I think that's where they used to come. But I used to think it was because they wanted to know Jesus. And I used to, help kids and at the same time as telling everyone about Jesus, really. So apparently I'm the same. Right. I don't think I look the same. So no, I never rebelled.
Which is great, isn't it?
I never rebelled. The most rebellious I got was when I braided all of my hair and chose to wear no shoes for a season when I went all hippie-ish after school.
I did that as well. I haven't got any hair left to braid, but you still have. You could still do it. You could still put it off.
I potentially could, yeah. I remember your friends at my cousin's wedding. There were quite a few of you, I think, with interesting hairstyles.
Right. Well, I hark back to those days. Anyway, when I think of you, Betsy, I think mainly of the church leading and the trauma work, and one sort of led into the other, didn't it? So, what took you from leading church and going into trauma stuff?
So again, I think I didn't always get what normal was. So we started this church in Bath. My husband and I moved here in 1999 with one baby I now employ him, which is weird. Mm-hmm. He's now 24 and one on the way. And I probably 5 years in, we opened a counselling department within the church, and it was normal to have. I think we had 4 or 5 staff who were fully trained counsellors. I think it's a while ago now, and that was just normal for me, really. I think probably a mistake that I made was in my pastoring. I didn't particularly know the boundary between being a psychotherapist or a pastor. I look back on that and think, that's something no one really teaches. And then it got to buying this building as a church freedom centre, which I'm right in at the moment. We bought that in 2008, and it's a huge building, but we only built it purely with the purpose of having an auditorium on the grounds, purely for the purpose of having a church building that we would write somehow in the deeds that it will never be able to be turned into a graphic studio or a cinema. It will always be for the purpose of making Jesus famous forever. And I was just worried about how many church buildings are being used for other things. So we spent years looking for this site. We found it. It had a previous planning permission on it, and that was why we bought it. The problem I've got is I so want children to love church, because I guess my theology and my philosophy is if kids love church, they'll eventually love Jesus, because you can't be around the house of God for long without realizing how incredibly good God is. So I just want children to think that church is the best day of the week. So I wanted amazing kids facilities, but I didn't want to run a school. I didn't want to run a play group or something. So I wasn't sure what to do. I'd often chat to team and staff, and we never really knew. So we just didn't do anything. We bought this building. We were going to knock it down and put a big building up. And then around October time in 2010, it was a dream at night. I was actually asleep. God likes to talk to me when I'm asleep, not talking. And in the middle of the night, I saw the building renovated, the bit we were going to knock down. It was fully renovated, and it had a soft play in it. It had a castle, which was Psalm 91. The soft play had a theme of underwater, which in psychotherapy is very much connected to the subconscious. And I saw all these little therapy rooms, and I saw kids from all over the world coming. And it was called the Trauma Recovery Centre. And I actually woke my husband up at 3 a.m, and I said, honey, we're not knocking it down, we're renovating it. It's going to be a trauma recovery centre. Kids from all over the world are going to come and find help. To which I think he probably grunted at me and went, great, and so went to sleep. But then I took it to about 100 of our kind of group leaders and said, I feel like God said this, but it feels like a big weighty thing. It feels bigger than anything has felt before. So can we pray that this is definitely God's thing? And everyone agreed. And so we started renovating it. And that was October 2010. And so far, we'd only renovated the very top, which was a horrible, grotty caretaker's apartment. And we'd made that into a pastor's apartment. So we have pastors and missionaries from all over the world coming and having free holidays. And we stuff it full of, food and wine and make sure they're really well looked after. So that was already running and operating. So yeah, that was all very exciting. And I knew it was called a trauma recovery centre. So I started to find out, does anybody is anyone a therapist? Would anyone like to train as a therapist? Obviously, it kind of poured out of me in preaching. Lots of people responded. I hosted a proper play therapy organisation, did some training in our building to start training about 15 team. And then those of us that were already qualified, that I hadn't actually remembered to tell anyone in our church I was qualified, because I didn't think it was important. So a few people didn't fully believe me. And I was like, no, I qualified in 1994. And so we started the therapy centre. The problem was that immediately caused, well, I'm fairly sure the two coincided quite dramatically with the death threat and harassment that went on for 5 years. So we had to move house. All 4 of our children were in schools in Bath. The one I now employ, well, I employ 2 actually, but one had to move just before his GCSEs, May. We moved the 17th of May, just before GCSEs. So it was all very dramatic. Had lots of police, CCTV cameras, lots of faff going on. And a lady came to speak who I didn't think was a follower of Jesus. And she came and she sat in my office, and she was quite intimidating, and she wore a grey suit. And then she saw I've got a verse written in my office, and no one knows it's from the Bible, because God told me to be like Esther and not say who my people were and where I come from. To which I thought, what? How do I do that? And he said really clearly, be like Esther. Do not say who your people are and where you come from, because you're here for such a time as this. So we had to take take off lots of things around my office that were all about Jesus, because that's all I talk about. But just above my sofa, it says, "He sent me to speak good news to the poor, heal the brokenhearted, freedom for captives, and comfort those who mourn." Which, of course, is from Isaiah 61. And people would come in here and say, "Oh, that's beautiful. Who wrote it?" And I always say, "Oh, my father." Right. Because I can't say the Bible. But this lady looked and said, "I'm a Christian. Are you a Christian?" And I went, "Yes." And we cried and hugged. And then I told her all that was going on in my life. And she said, "Well, you put a big bullseye on your face when you started a trauma recovery centre, because trauma is the main way that the enemy ruins the blueprint of people's life and stops them becoming who God has called them to be."
Yes.
So by saying you're a trauma recovery centre, you're saying you're a devil enemy centre. So obviously, like, hello, she said. She treated me like I was really dumb. She went, "Hello, of course you're going to have attack and assault and persecution. How did you think you were going to do it?" And I just sat there going, "I didn't know." It was a big shock. I felt back like I was about 5.
And it was so off the wall, wasn't it? It was so normal, sort of in terms of spiritual warfare. I mean, talk a bit about that, because I think a Western crowd, we don't get it as clearly.
It was just devastating, but it was relentless, and I think it comes with. It comes with when you're familiar with sort of, I mean, I actually got banned from using the word demon. You weren't allowed to use it, which is really difficult when it comes to reading the Bible, who gives us a very clear commission at the end of every gospel as to what we're meant to be doing, and sharing the good news and freeing people from the oppression of the enemy. But that's actually seen, I've discovered with rather a shock, that's seen in many local authorities, particularly as a secular city like Bath, as revolutionary and therefore very dangerous and radical and all of that kind of stuff. And so it became very, very difficult to do anything without having to overthink everything. In the practical, it was every single day I'd get anonymous emails, I'd get threatening emails, I'd get anonymous posts, I'd get music sent to me, like Another One Bites the Dust, just sent like that. With the next one will be your husband, then it'll be your and listing off names of people that were going to be killed, apparently. Lots and it was relentless for 5 years, non-stop. But it meant that every time we went to a different meeting or a different setting to do something, usually somebody had written a letter to them first saying, "This person's coming," and one of the things was I wasn't qualified, because I'd forgotten to tell anyone I was, but I have all my certificates on a PDF. I got that sorted quite quickly. But people were very scared of the link between the church and trauma, which I actually do understand. I think there is a lot of misuse of power and a lot of shame teaching. I've written a book subsequently on shame, which I think is really interesting. And there's a lot of people that don't follow Jesus that are very bothered by some theologies that I think are sometimes misinterpreted, wrongly taught, or just not taught. So things like original sin, a lot of people grow up thinking they're intrinsically a bad person, which actually is shame. And so that's why they grow up so hateful towards religion, because they feel like it's trapped them in this sense of I'm so unloved, I'm so hated. And so I just encountered an awful lot of people that became suspicious about me, and had a lot of emails. I mean, there were 3 boxes of documents in the end of things that had happened. And one of the people was eventually arrested in 2015, which was massive, because the criminal justice system in England doesn't really work at the moment. Obviously, I run lots of trauma centres, and the stat is around 98% of rape victims don't get their rapist prosecuted.
Terrible.
So, sexual abuse, harassment, rape have already been decriminalised in England at the moment due to lack of police and lack of training and lack of availability of time to train. And so it was a miracle I got him arrested. And that was because probably I was working quite closely with some MPs who had also had death threats, and we were all presenting together in Parliament and other places on the trauma of harassment. The relentlessness of feeling unsafe and having to overthink your safety all the time.
Yeah.
So, it was weird. It was a very weird season. And but I knew it was the enemy trying to silence me. And it was all, and actually, oh man, even when I tried to open this building for the TRC, I never lose my voice, really, probably 3 times in my life. The day we came to open the building, and the snag line, is that what we call it? The line underneath our the trauma recovery centre at the time was called A Voice for the Voiceless. And I lost my voice. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even open the building. So it was things like that. There were so many suspicious weirdnesses going on to try and stop me speaking.
Yeah.
But that didn't work.
Yeah, I had death threats myself in Burundi, very different, and it was a traumatic experience. It was much more brief, and I sort of changed where I lived briefly. For you, it was all-encompassing, wasn't it? You properly changed where you live. You wouldn't tell people where you live, all sorts of stuff, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that was hard for the kids because obviously they were on social media and they couldn't say where they lived, and there were lots and lots and lots of complexity. Little Noah was 4, and we told him we'd moved to Aberdeen because he was the sort of the weak link in the sense of anybody could find out where we lived from a 4-year-old. Yeah. And then I remember the reception class teacher saying, "We're about to do the topic of where we live. What do we do?" And I said, "Oh, he's going to realise Aberdeen's in Scotland." Okay. Yeah. How are we gonna do this? So there was just so much knock-on effect of it. But it didn't stop me speaking what God had given me to speak, and I think it's given me so much more of an understanding of how much the enemy wants people to be traumatized, and he's so threatened by people having freedom, and I feel like my experience of church growing up, which was with beautiful people who were, godly, wonderful people, but it was so much about your outer expression of your relationship with God. So much about that, so much about outer behaviors. And I think the revelation of this trauma stuff that I teach mostly to people that don't know Jesus, but when I get to teach it to those that do know Jesus, it's so much about the word integrity. It's the integration of the subconscious and the conscious that enables holiness, and holiness should be the natural flow of God healing our subconscious wounds at the same time as having an understanding in our cognitive, and when our conscious and our subconscious is integrated, which is actually, I teach all the neuroscience of that now, actually produces a natural holiness, a natural sense of this is who I am and this is who God's called me to be. And trauma no longer has that subconscious hold on people's entire futures, entire dreams, entire ability to be creative and walk into what God's called them to with courage and faith. So I get very excited about it.
Yeah, and I'm not saying I don't understand what you're saying, but it is, in a way, it's just another language for us laymen, normal people, isn't it? It's a different way of viewing things, and yet so obviously crucial and fruitful from your work. I mean, you're now seen, aren't you, as a sort of an authority in the nation on it? Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, weirdly enough, it is. Yeah, definitely. I'm on lots and lots of round tables in Parliament. I've started something which is a national network with 7 of my friends who are known as the leading experts in the UK as well. And we get to network together so that we're actually, it sounds a little bit arrogant, and honestly, I think it's funny, but we are actually trying to change the entire nation. Yeah. Actually, more than that, we're trying to change more than that, because we're trying to change the social care system. I'm training, well, I can't give details, but a large percentage of people of the NHS, I'm actually incredibly privileged enough to be on a board. Again, they don't know I'm a pastor of a church, but it's a board of something which will eventually change the entire social justice system for children and young people who have been victims of crime. It's the most exciting thing. It's not in England, it's in somewhere else. And I get to sit on boards with all these chief of police and chief of social work and chief of everything. Didn't know there were so many chiefs around. And I just sit there thinking, man, I should have put lipstick on. I should have probably worn a jacket. God, why have you put me here? But honestly, that was my dominant theme last time. I should have worn lipstick.
What is fascinating to me as you're talking as well is I'm picturing you as one of the most out there, Western Christians, totally unashamed about your faith. And yet, are you in that context still assuming the role of Esther? You're still sort of undercover, as it were. Undercover makes it sound sort of devious. It's not devious. It's just
but actually I think it was my first ever parliamentary meeting, and I sat there. And I was still learning how to not straight away talk about Jesus, because that's what I've always done. And so I was really, really trying to catch myself. And I sat on this big board table, and I'd put my jacket down, because in those early days I did properly wear jackets all the time. And I put my jacket down. I'd gone to get a cup of tea, and then as I went to sit back down where my jacket was, the lady next to me, who's quite a well-regarded lady, and she just looked at me and she said, "Oh, I wondered who I was sitting next to. Thank God you're not one of those dreadful religious people. Couldn't bear to sit next to one of those." And I felt like that was the first time I was in Parliament, and I thought, oh, right, so you've got me here to be good news to people, but without. So what I say is I'm doing all that Isaiah 61 talks about, as Jesus asked us all to do, but I can't say the name of the king. So I talk about the kingdom of God, which is healing and hope and wholeness and integrity, but I can't talk about who the king is. But if you're seeking him, you will definitely find out. So if you Google hard enough, you'll find out what I do, and you can always ask me, and I will absolutely, undoubtedly tell you who I'm doing this for, and who my audience is, and what my motivation is, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. But it also can be easily sort of misunderstood, isn't it? Some people say, "Oh no, she's putting her light under a bushel," but you're not. You're just being strategic.
Not at all.
You've written, was it 7 books on trauma? How did they sort of come about?
Yeah, that's funny. Yes, I've written 3 books about Jesus before, which I've had to take off Amazon and stuff and hide them, because that gave me away very quickly. And one of them was on inner healing stuff. But the books came about because in our trauma recovery centres, we have a parenting support group that runs while the children and young people get therapy. And I wrote a handbook for them. And I actually had just asked a friend of mine who's a professor in social work and child protection somewhere in England, and I'd said, "Oh, could you do a foreword for it? I think people would really appreciate to see it endorsed by somebody with your expertise." And he said, "More than that, this has to be published." And he sent it to a publisher and said, "Please publish it." And then I got the email from the publisher saying, "This is incredible. Let's get it done. We can get it done within 4 months." Wow. And that was called The Simple Guide to Child Trauma. And then he said, "We need more. We need a series. What more can you do?" So I've done one a year for 7 years, which has been really exciting to do, actually. And they've now been translated into so many different languages. I have no idea. They send me them, but I don't know what the language is because I can't read it. I wasn't very good at languages at school. So Romanian and Russian and simple Chinese and Chinese. Don't know what the difference is. Okay. Lots of different languages now. So that's fun. Yeah,
good stuff.
They're proving to be very helpful for people. So that's the main thing.
Hey folks, I hope you're enjoying the podcast. I'm loving the response we're getting from across the world. It's just wonderful to see how encouraging and inspiring it is being and hitting the spot. Listen, if you are being blessed by it, I'd love it. Basically, this happens under the auspices of our ministry, Great Lakes Outreach, which works in the poorest and the hungriest country in the world, which is Burundi. We're having an incredible impact in the toughest of circumstances. We want to carry on supporting those local folks doing a great job. So if you wanted to, greatlakesoutreach.org/inspired. You could make a donation there. I'd so appreciate it. Also, it's word of mouth, isn't it? So gossip these podcasts to other people, get them to subscribe, give us a great review. Absolutely wonderful. So grateful to you. So that's greatlakesoutreach.org/inspired. If you want to do a monthly, a couple of quid a month, or a one-off donation, we'd be incredibly grateful. All right, now let's get back to the podcast.
Well, let's stick on the old international theme. You had big links with Kenya. You were overseeing 120 churches or something. What happened there? I mean, this is like your 5 parallel tracks of different lives you're leading.
Oh my goodness, I love Kenya. Obviously, I feel very connected there with all my relatives. But yeah, I was overseeing 120 churches, which was what I found to be the best two-way relationship, in the sense that we take out teams of people that encountered very obvious spiritual warfare in a way that's so much more not hidden. And so they really learned so much that I think they're still so grateful to have ever gone out. And they came with me as team to preach in all the different village churches, which for most of them was the first time they ever preached, and were so grateful to our church family over there for letting so many of us do that kind of thing. But I'd go over and do conferences in a church in Bungoma with the lovely Bishop Frederick, who we're still very good friends with. We ended up, when the trauma thing sort of burst out of nowhere, because it did feel like it burst out of nowhere. And yeah, I wasn't able to continue that. But we're still very good friends, and we follow each other on YouTube and that kind of thing. But it was just such a blessing to help our British people really grasp the obviousness of what the enemy does to people's lives in a way that I just think is really difficult in England, because it's so much more hidden. And so, I believe that children in England are purposely and intentionally desensitized to the spiritual realm, so that they don't notice what they're stumbling into and get completely muddled and messed up with all sorts of things because they trip into it rather than it's very obvious. So yeah, everything about Kenya was just the best season of our life, really, as a church. I used to train on a book that I'd written before the trauma books, before the TRC, before the trauma season, called Making Your Mess Your Message. And there were quite a few people in that particular town who were studying it in groups to start a college around sort of therapy, counselling stuff to help people. And that was really special.
So making your mess your message.
Yeah.
And is that, do you feel like now, particularly your overtly Christian work, that's a massive part of your message is what you've been through?
Yes, I think so. It's very hard to not mention it, because it still has impact on our daily life, really, the harassment. And it wasn't just a few Twitter accounts and a few emails. It really was relentless and complex. And so, yes, I feel like God will give us supernatural courage to go through whatever we have to go through in order to see his kingdom expand. And we can't limit how much courage and supernatural strength he'll give us. And I know that he holds me every day, and I still sometimes battle with fear in a way I never used to, which seems quite ironic. And I have to be very honest and say I'm quite traumatized, which seems incredibly ironic, considering I'm the one teaching on trauma so much. But I know that actually being traumatized is quite helpful, because I can stand in the shoes of people so much faster and be able to see what they need. Yeah. Although ultimately, of course, what we really need is written in Psalm 91, which is God, who is our safe place. He is our strong tower. It's only under his wings that we'll find refuge and know our real safety. And in fact, at the beginning of COVID, we did that whole series for our kids club, Psalm 91. Wouldn't this be a great time if every single one of our kids in church could learn Psalm 91 off by heart? So there were lots of prizes flying around for that, because I think that in this season of fear, we need to know that psalm inside out and back to front.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. So much fear in the house, isn't there?
Yeah.
I know you've got loads of beautiful, juicy miracle stories from, all different aspects of your life. But tell us about the building of the church. And I know people dug deep, and the Lord did all sorts of stuff.
Well, I think that there's so many miracles in it. I still go in there and go, wow. How did you do this? And it was called the Generation Project, because it's not for us, it's for the generations to come. We just get to use it in the short term. I guess the biggest miracle, it was during the early days of the harassment, as would be completely expected, navigating a church through essentially what became a church split is really tough when it's very personal. So we lost probably 200 people from the church, which has a massive, obviously, impact on the ability to keep buildings running. But God knew that in advance, which I know we know, but when it hits your personal life, it's incredible. And we had a little building that we were selling. And while it wasn't selling, I think this is incredible. There was a development company that said, this is in my non-building language, he said, if we pay you a chunk of money, and it was hundreds of thousands of pounds per year, if we pay you this chunk of money, could you not sell it to anyone else because we think we want it? And so we got all this money for absolutely nothing that kept the church going, while we had an empty building that we didn't need anyway. And it was hundreds of thousands of pounds that enabled us to keep going, to get to the point where we could then have a good financial record to be able to apply for a massive mortgage to put the big building up. And that just doesn't happen, not in our world. So that was incredible. And then to get planning permission took 10 years because it's a World Heritage City. 10 whole years, and in fact we're still getting planning permission 2.5 years after building it for fences to go up because it's so complicated. And in the end, the reason we got planning permission really was to do with my trauma work and some influential people that I'd helped, and there was a letter that went in from somebody influential who said, I'm a big fan of Betsy de Thierry's work, and so the building needs to go up. I don't think he still knows I'm a pastor. So I don't know how that all worked, but somehow something that we'd been trying to get planning permission for a church building in a very secular city. In Bath, you can't have church or any form of religious meetings in any of the main buildings within town that are known. All of them are called secular. They are known as secular buildings. You know, we tried to hire them out for a party and you can't even do that. And so it was quite a miracle to have planning permission for an actual church, brand new church building. But it was only due to the trauma work, which again, God in his incredible wisdom had managed to sort all of that out. And, you know, meanwhile, we had lots of different things like people in hospital. I remember one man that we suddenly heard he'd had a hemorrhage in his brain, in his head. And so, you know, we managed to bundle the children in the car and drive down, and they said that he was probably, you know, he was never going to be able to function again. And my usual way of pastoring was to give my kids sweets. So I'd always give the kids sweets and sit them sort of together, looking after each other at the entrance to intensive care, while we'd run in, lay hands, because we didn't have long, because we had kids out there. So we'd quickly lay hands on and, you know, in the name of Jesus, and rebuke this and that and pray healing. And bam, he was speaking within an hour.
Beautiful.
Got up absolutely fine. And my kids thought that was normal. And then we'd go and have pizza. And so that, as far as they were concerned, we drove to London to have pizza and have sweets. They didn't, you know, and of course someone almost dead didn't die. So that's been sort of our life story, really. That's sort of how we do things. And now, of course, my oldest, he was a pastor in Oxford for 4 years, also from 18. I think he's the 5th generation pastor. I think so. I think I'm the 4th, I'm not sure. And then we were just advertising for help for me, because my husband's stepped down in the death threat years, as we call them. He found it all far too overwhelming. Just wasn't able to really, just lots of things all sort of came up at the same time. So he sort of stepped into being much more like one of a small Anglican church vicar type thing. So he does funerals and maybe some weddings and prays for people and visits people in hospital and prays. He's brilliant at that. Pastors. He runs about 5 different groups for men. He does all of that. So I felt quite lonely for the last 10 years, sort of feeling like, oh, how am I meant to be doing this? And obviously I have all the women in leadership stuff that's still thrown at me, like, you shouldn't be doing it. I'm like, oh, well, I find myself doing it. And then literally I was advertising, and we were considering somebody who was from Birmingham. We'd met them several times, and the wife had been on one of my 12-day courses, and we found out she was a Christian. And then my big son Josh, who's 24, suddenly said, Mum, have you filled that post? And I said, getting close. And he said, right. And I said, obviously everyone thinks it should be you, but I'm never going to ask you. That would be so wrong. Which honestly wasn't being manipulating. I was in a swimming pool. It was very casual. I hadn't expected to see him. I was swimming with Noah. And I suddenly said, obviously, you know. And he said, but Mum, I actually think I am called. I think I'm meant to be there. I was like, really? you kidding? And he said, no, God's spoken to me. I was like, really? I never thought you'd come home. I never thought you'd come back. He said, no, if the post, and he'd helped me write the job description for the post because it was what he was doing in Oxford. So most of the document was sort of cut and pasted from his job anyway. So he moved back almost a year ago, and he's now associate pastor, and he's the one that does a lot of the local church stuff because I'm just a little bit too busy. I'm working on I'm working at the moment in 16 different countries, which is really fun. But it means I'm not so good at building relationships with local church pastors or doing all of that. So now Josh gets to help me with all of that, which is perfect. Yeah.
Wonderful. Lovely to be able to do it together. We've touched on your work in Parliament. Do you want to delve into that at all?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it's been a learning curve. I still feel, I often say I'm a bit like Miranda, if I'm honest. I'm a bit like Miranda in Parliament. There was even once I was doing a speech, and I promise you, I actually had a moment as I looked down and I actually saw a tag, and I got my cardigan on. It was a bright yellow cardigan, and it was mustard colour. And I just thought, bum, it's the wrong way round. So I actually did turn, as I was talking to everybody in a speaker's room, I actually just took it off and put it back on again the right way. I thought that was probably best. In retrospect, it probably wasn't. So yeah, oh my goodness, what a learning curve. I was once speaking to Theresa May, but I didn't know it was Theresa May, and I was telling her about the harassment, and it was in a sort of a meeting around harassment, and she was informing me of so much about the police. And I was on the train on the way home, and I was telling my husband, I said, honey, I met this woman, grey hair. She seemed to really understand about the police. And he said, I think that was Theresa May. I Googled her and went, oh, yeah, you're right. So, I wasn't the most strategic in Parliament, but I trusted God that whatever he wanted me to do, I'd do. I guess the highlight for me was working with Young Minds, who I was a consultant for, and we produced the best ever document called Addressing Adversity, which actually people can still get. You can literally put into a search engine, Addressing Adversity, Young Minds, and there's a doc there, which is really fat. I've got the actual book, and I've got a chapter in there, and that went to every clinical commissioning group in the whole of the UK to explain the correlation between trauma in childhood leading to either the criminal justice system or adult mental health. And what I'm most passionate about is when people grasp this, we can literally see our prisons empty. We can literally see our adult mental health systems change. And so much of the ethos around it it's straight from the Bible. It's it's two things. One is building communities of compassion, kindness, empathy, listening well to each other, speaking well of each other, stopping, gossip and slander and all that stuff that the Bible tells us. So I get the huge privilege of teaching that alongside, on the other hand, recognizing that we do need some really very skilled people to work with significant trauma, because it's complicated. What is invisible is more complicated than that which is visible. And so this Young Minds book was just massive in terms of having the potential to change our mental health system. CAMHS currently don't work universally at all in a trauma-informed framework. They do not. It's very diagnostic-based. It's very medical-based. We're medicating a lot of children that need relational intervention. They need people. They need people to rewire their entire brains, and instead we're medicating them and stuffing them in the corner and saying, yeah, and yet those symptoms are saying, help me, help me. And so it feels on the heart of God to speak hope for recovery. Yeah. There is hope for recovery. People don't have to stay locked down into such internal turmoil and pain with behaviors that cause, such difficulty for everybody, when actually there are keys that God has released to us to see the brokenhearted healed. So it's I guess my highlight of all my parliamentary stuff, which included phenomenal. Oh no, do you know what, the best? That wasn't the highlight. I remember the highlight because I was queuing for a meeting, and I properly thought there was going to be canapes, because canapes at Parliament are really good. And I hadn't eaten dinner and I was quite excited. And then I walked in and suddenly realised that there was a microphone above every one of our heads. And I just went, oh no. And it was about a really important green paper. And I hadn't read it. So again, I felt very Miranda-y and was just saying, Jesus, whatever I meant to say, you're going to have to pop it in my head, because I can't, I haven't eaten. I'm tired. I thought I was coming for a book launch and a party. Anyway, the guy that was chairing it, and there was all the secretaries of state for health and, you know, all the important people in the room. And so he kept pointing at me and I kept thinking, oh man, not me. I don't know what to say. And then I just went, look, I'm being obedient. God put me here. He must have something to say. So I put my hand up, not having the faintest clue what I was going to say, because I didn't know. And as I put my hand up, the chair went, yes, over there. And I said, hi, I'm Betsy Thierry. And then this message came out of me, which I know was from God. And actually one of the main phrases was, we've got to bring humanity back in to the frontline professionals. We need to recognize their humanity. We need to recognize their vulnerability. We need to recognize that they need clinical supervision for their traumatic roles in police, in the NHS. And then it went on to say, and we're medicating children that need relationships. We need a relational curriculum. We need relationships for these children who are in poverty. We need relationships for children who are fatherless. Yes. We need relationship for children that have been abused. We need to be facilitating communities full of relationships, preferably intergenerational. And it just went off, which of course is actually describing the church.
Yes.
Where else are you going to get an intergenerational community full of compassion, kindness, love, built on one who is bigger than us, that holds the future in his hands?
That's right.
But I can only point to Jesus. I can't in those settings talk about Jesus. But people would say to me, where on earth would we find such a community of intergenerational people that would spend time building relationships with children in need? And I was like, oh, they're around. There are lots of them around. And we're here for such a time as this.
Amen. Such a time as this. Listen, Betsy, time's run out, which is, I knew it would, wanting more. So let me say in Kirundi, Iman igu hezagire mushikanje. God bless you, my sister. It's really wonderful to talk to you. Is there anything you want to plug, you want to point people towards?
Well, I guess the most exciting thing is we're just about to launch a project called Trauma Informed Churches, and so far we've just got a website, but I'm just tentatively, because I've only been training people that don't know Jesus, or they might do, but they don't know that I do. And we're just launching. A lot of what I'm doing in that field is coming through into something called Trauma Informed Churches, where we want to equip churches to work, particularly post or current pandemic, but much more than that, with an understanding of trauma, an understanding of building these communities that I told Parliament all about, of faith, hope and love, where people can actually recover because they feel emotionally safe. So if people are interested, there's a thing called Trauma Informed Churches, which there's a course. It's a 7-day course that's over 6 months starting in November. And I'm excited. I've got some people beginning to sign up at the moment. But yeah, I've got a YouTube with free stuff on it that tries to aim to help people, and I don't know, stuff. I've got stuff, Simon. I've got lots of stuff.
We'll put various stuff in the blurb afterwards. Listen, Betsy, God bless you loads. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me. It's been a delight.
Great. Well, listen, everybody, I hope you've been inspired. I think it's been another cracking week. I love it. Again, just people from different walks of life, some utter beautiful nut jobs like Betsy. Can I call you that? Is that all right?
Yeah, of course.
And we'll be back next week with another fantastic guest. So do join us then. If you've enjoyed it, please give us a top quality rating on whatever platform you've been watching us on. If you want to be in touch with me, simongilbert.com or any of the social media platforms. Brilliant. All the best. Toodaloo.